This is Plant-Based Briefing. 19th century animal rights activists had a lot of Moxie. Here's how to get it back. Part 2 by Crystal Heath at vox.com/futureperfect. And I'm Marian Erickson, your host. This is the curated content plant-based podcast where I narrate articles on plant-based and vegan living with permission in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. And this article was longer than that, so it's a two-parter. I read part 1 yesterday, so go back and listen to that first, and then come back here for part 2. And now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. 19th century animal rights activists had a lot of Moxie. Here's how to get it back. Part 2 by Crystal Heath at vox.com/futureperfect. Where the modern movement against factory farming went wrong. The animal rights movement reconstituted roughly 50 years ago with the publication of philosopher Peter Singer's Animal Liberation in 1975. The now classic book brought veganism and animal advocacy to a new generation of activists at a time when animal slaughter had been systematized and mechanized in ways the Victorian-era vegetarians could have never imagined. New groups like People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, founded in 1980, and a crop of farm animal rights organizations in the ensuing decades aimed to expose conditions inside animal production facilities and slaughterhouses to persuade the public to stop eating animals. The activists of Animal Rights 2.0 successfully drew public attention to the contemporary plight of slaughter-bound animals. Their call to action, though, was one that could only be adopted by those with the personality and mindset to resist social pressure and the meat industry's glut of publicly subsidized products. It was fundamentally a movement built on individuals' consumption choices, which made for committed activists, but also an insular, fractious community that has struggled to convince a critical mass of the public to change its diet. For a population that had gotten hooked on cheap meat and dairy, the animal movement's message was polarizing, judgmental, and restrictive. To be vegan was to be morally superior. By framing animal exploitation as a consumer issue, animal advocates unwittingly reified animal agriculture's narrative that eating their products was a matter of personal choice, a choice that vegan extremists sought to take away. In reality, the meat industry has fought to ensure that we're all forced to pay them, whether we buy their products or not. Consumers have no ability to opt out of, for example, paying for the cruel taxpayer-funded exterminations of tens of millions of animals taking place now at poultry giants like Tyson and Jennie-O because of the poultry industry's failure to adequately prepare for bird flu. Vegan or not, few people want to see these mega corporations bailed out on the public's dime. In recent years, the animal movement has diversified its work beyond vegan advocacy to tactics from welfare reforms on animal confinements to taking direct action to investing in the next generation of meat alternatives. But it still lacks a coherent strategy to change the foundational agricultural policies that give livestock production the upper hand. One promising route to doing that may be through the veterinary profession, a key gatekeeper standing between animal agriculture and the public purse. The public expects vets to advocate for animals' interests, but right now, organized veterinary medicine is captive to the livestock industry, often serving to legitimize practices that cause extreme prolonged pain and suffering on a massive scale for animals raised for food, as veterinarian Gwendolyn Ray-Zilg told Vox last year. The animal agriculture and pharmaceutical industries, the latter profits from selling vaccines, antibiotics, and other medications to slaughter-bound animals, have become heavily entangled with the American Veterinary Medical Association, or AVMA, the country's leading veterinary organization which helps shape federal and state policy on how animals are treated. Livestock companies give veterinary students scholarships, forge partnerships with veterinary schools and production-optimizing animal science programs, and even build their own veterinary schools abroad. Earlier this year, the AVMA endorsed federal legislation designed to invalidate one of the most important farm animal welfare laws ever passed in the U.S., California's Proposition 12, which bans the pork industry's confinement of pigs in gestation crates, cages barely larger than their bodies. In the bird flu outbreak of the last few years, the AVMA has played a central role in enabling factory farms' dependence on Ventilation Shutdown Plus, VSD Plus, a method being used to mass cull chickens and turkeys on farms hit with bird flu by heating them to death in sealed sheds. It's one of the most shockingly cruel meat industry developments in recent memory, and it's being carried out at taxpayers' expense. Livestock producers are only supposed to be reimbursed for culling animals when they use methods that are AVMA approved. but public records have shown that veterinary officials have pushed for approval for the industry's preferred kill methods, no matter how cruel, ensuring that meat producers can get taxpayer-funded bailouts. A vision for animal rights 3.0. For the meat industry, this alliance with the veterinary profession has paid off abundantly. The next wave of animal activism, Animal Rights 3.0, will need to take a page from their playbook and work to turn animal professionals, including veterinarians and state and federal agriculture officials, against the systems that have enlisted them into profit-driven animal cruelty. Many veterinarians go into the profession because they love animals, yet in veterinary school, we're often taught that animal rights is a threat to our profession, that limiting animal experimentation would harm medical progress, and that factory farming is necessary to feed the world. Like the winged monkeys in The Wizard of Oz doing the bidding of the Wicked Witch of the West, veterinarians obediently recite anti-animal rights narratives, serving the interests of multi-billion-dollar conglomerates. The vast majority of U.S. veterinarians working today treat companion animals like cats and dogs, not animals raised for food, and I've often observed that rather than rock the boat, they tend to defer to their livestock industry colleagues' expertise about the appropriate treatment of farm animals. The small percentage of veterinarians who do work in animal agriculture and industry are overrepresented in the AVMA's decision-making bodies through greater access and opportunities for positions on the AVMA's various committees and advisory panels, while veterinarians who vocally oppose industry practices, as I have, are silenced. Animal Rights 2.0, with its focus on boycott and abstinence from systems that it finds reprehensible, has missed an opportunity to develop activists within the professional community that's perhaps best positioned to challenge corporate animal abuse. Even veterinarians who already support animal rights and oppose factory farming, when I voice my concerns with the AVMA, have told me countless times, that's why I'm no longer a member. That's exactly how the industry likes it. Pro-animal voices, lacking the ability to comment on policies and guidelines, join committees, and hold positions of influence. Animal Rights 3.0 will have to shed the fixation on personal purity that has prevented the movement from shaping policy and regulation. Animal advocates should have a seat at the table in rooms where decisions are made about how animals live and die. Veterinarians are deeply embedded in the USDA. The agency hires the highest number of veterinarians of any other national organization in the world. Pat Basu, former USDA Chief Public Health Veterinarian, told me in an email, making it a prime opportunity for vets who want to help farm animals. Those whose long-term career ambitions do not depend on the livestock industry have the unique opportunity to obtain positions of influence within the USDA, state agriculture departments, or the AVMA, work to rigorously enforce animal welfare laws that often go ignored, and publicly speak out if they're prevented from doing their jobs. They can use their roles to question the ongoing denial of rights to animals and advocate for redirecting public funds away from animal agriculture. We already have the building blocks for this. A nascent movement of veterinarians is fighting to change the profession's priorities to align with the interests of animals instead of their corporate oppressors. More veterinarians, including myself, are working with animal rights activists to draw public attention to animal agriculture's atrocities. We need more organizational capacity in animal rights to develop partnerships with professionals who work with animals, including not just the already converted, but also those who work in industries that exploit animals and are questioning the ethics of their roles. The latter phenomenon, sometimes known as moral injury, is well known in veterinary medicine, yet too often veterinarians are trained to quiet the inner voice that tells them they're participating in an unjust system. We can empower these people to follow their conscience and protect the most vulnerable among us. Eventually, we can build institutional courage in organizations like the AVMA, a concept coined by psychologist Jennifer Freyd for when institutions that have committed grievous harm apologize for wrongdoing, correct the damage caused, and put systems in place to protect victims and whistleblowers in the future. There will be backlash, as we're already seeing today, with meat industry-led state bans on cell-cultivated meat and legislation challenging animal welfare laws. Yet we have to prepare ourselves for a brutal fight. We can draw inspiration from the animal activists of the 19th century who achieved so much with far less wealth and resources than we have today and understood the connection between all forms of social injustice. But they were unprepared for the arrival of a new economic order that would transform the American food environment and trade away the environment, public health, and animal welfare for abundant cheap meat. A century later, Animal Rights 2.0 awakened the public to the horrors of factory farming, but it emerged at a time when it was not yet clear how unlevel the playing field was between vegan advocates and their meat industry opponents. The next wave of animal activism will need to integrate these lessons from the past, building a movement that bridges the divide between activists, veterinarians, and other professionals, and empowers them to confront the systems that lead humanity to inflict large-scale atrocities on the animals with whom we share this planet. You just listened to 19th Century Animal Rights Activists Had a Lot of Moxie. Here's How to Get It Back, Part 2 by Crystal Heath at vox.com/futureperfect. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson. And this is a great article. It's uplifting on the one hand and inspiring to know how much prominence and success the activists were having a century ago. But on the other hand, it's demoralizing to realize what we're up against with government and industry and everybody in collusion. But we must understand, must be aware of what we're up against in order to change it. But then Crystal makes such a great case for the way forward, and Animal Rights 3.0 is already underway, thanks to organizations like hers and people like her. And I'll link some episodes in the show notes you may be interested in relating to veterinarians and what we're up against in general. One is 684, CEW's Smear Campaign Against Animal Protection Groups by Dr. Crystal Heath. 581, As a vet, I would protect all animals from harm, but the law won't let me. 476, Censorship Concerns and Veterinary Profession Should Not Condone Killing Animals by Heat Stroke. 308, A veterinary student receives an F for following her conscience, and a Guide to Conscientious Objection. And 274, Why Aren't More Veterinarians Vegan? So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.